Hello and welcome back to the History of Bangalore. Thank you for joining me. I'm Ramjee Chandran and today we are on episode 99 of season 2. In the last episode, we watched as the First Anglo-Mysore War found its character. The so-called Triple Alliance put together by the British collapsed before it had fired a single shot. Outwitted by Hyder Ali, who bought off the Marathas, flipped the Nizam, and left Colonel Smith standing at the gates of the Bengaluru Pete with no coalition and no plan B. Following that, the battles of Chengam and the Battle of Tiruvannamalai, coming up in the next episode, established something very important, that British discipline and Mysore mobility were evenly matched in battle in ways that neither side had fully anticipated. And there is a figure who moves through these early campaigns almost in the shadows, present but not yet prominent, watching, learning, being tested. A young man who will in time become the central figure of this entire story and of Mysore's history. His name is Tipu Sultan, and this episode is his introduction. But before I get there, as always, a word of thanks to my sponsors, the Prestige Group. They make this podcast possible. Building cities one landmark at a time, they transform dreams into reality. You can be a part of the future. Simply add prestige to your life. The name Tipu Sultan evokes all sorts of emotions. And there is much to say about this man who displayed such a conflicting and contradictory mix of character that it merits several episodes to take it all in. But this is not a podcast about Tipu Sultan. So I will have to keep myself from chasing down every Tipu Sultan story, no matter how tempting, and stick to the ones that make sense to the history of Bangalore. Now that itself is a lot. So, one bit at a time as we coast along the history of this city. And today's episode is a sort of Tipu primer, a quick introduction, if you like. Tipu Sultan was born in 1750, and that is the same year that his father had pulled off the Jinji windfall, that audacious seizure of 3 camel loads of gold from the chaos following the collapse of the Nizam of Hyderabad in this camp, as we learned from a previous episode. But the timing is almost too neat. And that year that Hyder Ali found the seed capital for his empire, the Mysore Empire, was the year that his heir came into the world. Tipu was born at Devanahalli, the same fort whose siege had launched his father Hyder Ali's career. Tipu's mother was Fakhruddin-Nisa, a woman of considerable intelligence, strong character by every account, who had more influence over Tipu's inner life than his father ever did. She remained in Bangalore for much of Tipu's childhood, while Tipu campaigned all over the plateau. The city that Hyder Ali had received as a Jagir was, in a real sense, Tipu's home. Hyder Ali was illiterate. He governed by instinct, memory, and an almost preternatural ability to read people and situations. He had no formal education and felt no lack from the absence of one, because what he possessed instead was a practical intelligence of a very high order, the sort that cannot be taught, only exercised. But he was determined that his son would be different. So Tipu received formal education that was unusual for the time and the place. Tipu was taught Arabic and Persian, mathematics, history, military science. He had French tutors, and that was a reflection of Hyder's deep respect for the French, their military methods, their everything. Tipu was taught the Quran with scholarly rigor. He read widely and retained everything that he had read. By the time that he was a young man, he possessed a library of over 2,000 volumes, Arabic, Persian, Hindi, and Turkish manuscripts covering history, theology, mathematics, astronomy, jurisprudence, poetry, and natural philosophy. After the fall of Srirangapatna, the British had catalogued Tipu's collection, and it was astonishing. But there were differences between father and son. Where Hyder Ali was a man of instinct, Tipu was a man of systems. When Hyder Ali governed through personal authority and the force of his presence, Tipu would govern through process, regulation, and the written order. So they were in many ways complete opposites. Yet, the son was unmistakably the product of the father. The most revealing story about Hyder's approach to raising his son was not a story of education and parental love. It is the story of punishment. At some point in the early 1770s, and that precise date is uncertain, and the sources differ on all the details, Hyder Ali ordered the public flogging of Tipu Sultan. So Tipu was maybe only about 16 or 17 years old at the time, and he had been given a military command, a small one, appropriate to his age and experience, or rather lack of experience. Now, there are many versions on why Tipu had been flogged in public. One version is that Hyder was into his cups the previous night and he woke up with a hangover and couldn't go to battle. And when they looked for Tipu, they could not find him because Tipu chose to make himself busy elsewhere. So that was the reason that he was flogged. By other accounts, it was because he had disobeyed explicit orders. Now, this explicit order was that either in a battle he had advanced too rashly or withdrawn too quickly from a position that he had been told to hold. Now, the accounts obviously are not consistent. But what all of them agree on is the consequence. Hyder Ali had him flogged in public, in front of all the soldiers. Now, this was not cruelty for its own sake, and you might be charitable and think of it as tough love, but the truth is it was theater, deliberate, calculated, and, one might say, pedagogically precise. Because Hyder Ali's message to the army by flogging his son was unmistakable. Military discipline applied to everyone. The heir to the throne was no exception. A commander who disobeyed orders would face the same consequences as any other soldier. Favoritism had no place in Hyder's army. But the message to Tipu was more complex. By subjecting his son to the punishment meted out normally to a common soldier, Hyder Ali was teaching him something that no classroom could convey. That power was not a privilege, that command carried absolute responsibility, and that the machinery of military authority had to be trusted completely or it would fail at the moment that it was needed the most. It is said that Tipu never repeated the offense. Whatever that offense had been, it was never repeated. Tipu Sultan became known in time for a fierce personal discipline that extended to everybody around him. His insistence on obedience was absolute and legendary. His intolerance of failure, too, was legendary. The flogged prince became a sultan who inspired simultaneous devotion and terror. Now, whether that flogging created these qualities in him or merely reinforced tendencies that were already there, it is impossible for me to say. It is a matter for psychology historians. But what is known is that Tipu learned a lesson, and that lesson stayed learned. And now for a quick commercial break, 30 seconds, and I'm back with the rest of Tipu's story right after this.
Maximum connectivity, maximum luxury, maximum lifestyle. Live your max at Prestige Raintree Park. Opulent residences nestled in 21 acres of breathtaking landscape with 1 lakh plus square feet of clubhouse, 3 swimming pools, and ample leisure and sports amenities. Experience exquisite living at Prestige Raintree Park in prime Whitefield with schools, offices, hospitals, and shopping malls just a hop away. Call 81399 or visit prestigeconstructions.com to know more. Radar approved.
Hyder Ali began introducing Tipu to active military campaigning while, as I said before, he was still in his teens. The first significant deployment came during the operations to suppress a rebellion in the Balam region, that's in the Malabar region near Tellicherry. Tipu rode at the head of a Mysore force and he put down the uprising. He was said to have displayed, in the words of contemporary accounts, dash and energy, and that came to the attention of Hyder Ali. So during the First Anglo-Mysore War, when Hyder gave Tipu his first independent command, that young man was barely 17 years old. He was assigned a strike force of anywhere between 5,000 and 10,000 cavalry, with the experienced commander Ghazi Khan serving alongside him to provide a steadying hand. The mission was as much psychological as it was military, and the objective was to raid the districts surrounding the British headquarters at Fort St. George in Madras. Remember, that was the capital of the Madras Presidency. and the tactics were to plunder and demonstrate that Mysore could reach well into the heart of British territory at will. Tipu reached St. Thomas Mount, which was just about 8 kilometers from the gates of Madras. The governor of Madras and the members of his council were all in their garden villas in the suburbs, probably enjoying the afternoon sea breeze, when suddenly the Mysore cavalry appeared on the horizon. Panicked, they fled to ships in the harbour to take refuge. And Tipu's forces burnt and plundered the villas, these being the homes of the men who governed the Madras Presidency, British India's southern stronghold. And all of these homes were reduced to ash by a teenager on his first independent command. There's much that has been said about the difference between Hyder Ali and Tipu Sultan, and the contrast between father and son was becoming visible even during these early years, and it extended beyond the personal into the philosophical. Hyder Ali was an entirely pragmatic man. For example, taxation. He taxed whatever he could tax, and permitted whatever could be regulated, and completely eliminated anything that threatened his authority or that of the state. He did not operate by any ideological program, and his credo, if you could call it that, was only and nothing more than the expansion and consolidation of Mysore power by whatever means were available to him. He kept company with everyone, with the Brahmins who ran his kingdom, with the French engineers who he had employed at the Taramandala factories and inside his army. He permitted arak and ganja because they could be taxed because they produced huge amounts of revenue for the state. And he regarded religion as a matter of personal practice and not public policy. But Tipu was far more complex. He was genuinely pious. This was not a performatively pious thing, but in a real way, in a way that shaped how he saw the world and his role in it. Tipu would later describe the Mysore state as Sultanati Khudadad, the God-given state. He saw himself not merely as a ruler, but as an instrument of a larger purpose. This gave him a certainty that his father never possessed. It also gave him a rigidity that his father would never have permitted himself as a matter of personal excess. Now, while Hyder, a people person, if you could call him that, could be charmed, Tipu, not a people person, could not be charmed. Where Hyder would negotiate, Tipu would stand firm. Where Hyder would tolerate ambiguity in the interest of some practical outcome, Tipu would insist on principle, even when that principle was costly. Now, you could not call them weaknesses exactly. In a different world, you might have called them strengths. But in the world that Tipu inherited, which was a world of shifting alliances, opportunistic neighbors, and a British adversary that was patient, well-financed, and completely without any sentiment, this rigidity would prove to be too expensive. Before I finish this introduction to Tipu Sultan, it's worth pausing on two details that say something important about this man. One is about his hometown, Bangalore. Now, Hyder Ali's Bangalore appears almost incongruous in its cosmopolitanism, more visibly green gardens and constant militarization, and the multiplicity of its cultures, all living in harmony even as its cantonments prepared for war. And Tipu had his own take on Bangalore. In his hands, the Taramandala factory in the Bangalore Pete was also a very important research and development lab, and in later episodes, I will talk about his fascination with technology and how he spent a huge amount of time developing things, playing with technology. Instead of becoming known for intolerant chaos, the city, Bengaluru's least tolerant ruler in history, actually called Bengaluru Darus Surur, the home of happiness. So when the British eventually took Srirangapatna in 1799 and started cataloguing everything that they could find in the palace, they recovered Tipu's personal belongings. And among them were telescopes, barometers, thermometers, mathematical instruments from London, that large personal library, scientific apparatus of every kind, and a watch, which is the pocket watch, which he carried on his person. Tipu Sultan was a man who worshipped science. He was fascinated by technology, by how things worked, by the mechanisms behind the visible surface of the world, by the possibility that understanding those mechanisms could give his state, Mysore, an advantage over adversaries who relied on numbers and money alone. In that sense, Tipu Sultan was way ahead of his time. We might describe him in today's parlance as a modernizing technocrat, but he was that in a feudal world. Tipu was a man who saw clearly what needed to be done, and that, in his view, was to chase the British out of India. Not just out of Mysore as some people believe, but out of India. In his writings, he clearly defined that the British had no place anywhere in India and they were bad for the country. He knew that he needed a strong ally, and that ally was going to be the French, and he needed time to bring the alliance in and to be able to present a very strong attack to the British to drive them out. By a strange quirk of fate, the French were almost here, but they never made it, and time would run out on Tipu Sultan. Now, all of that story is still ahead of us, but for now, Tipu is young. His father is at the height of his powers, and the war that will define the both of them is only just beginning. In my next episode, I pick up from where I left off in the previous one and take you to the Battle of Tiruvannamalai, which was dire and funny in equal parts. That's coming up right after this one. Stay tuned. I am Ramjee Chandran, and this is the history of Bangalore.